things which is nice for this career that you're starting. You have a lot of weird people like you all over the place. So I just know Johanna and Sasa because of WhatsApp. That another friend, Ucal, who is part of our committee here, who was here from big architects, told me that there is a friend that's coming to Lima, Peru, if I was here. So I said yes, and then I just found out they were not coming to Lima, Peru. These guys were going to Brazil, okay? But they needed a visa to get to Brazil. So when they went to the airport, I can tell these things, right?
Yeah, well, now you can. You want to be rented as soon.
So they were going to Brazil, but didn't have a visa. So we're there in the airport, and said, where do we go? So they said, let's go to Peru. So they came to Peru. So the reason they are here is they had a rebound of that. So thanks to the immigration laws in the world, you guys are going to have a fantastic time to hear about their work. They are from Canada. They are not from Canada, but no one is from Canada. They live in Canada. They live in Winnipeg. Do you have any idea where is it in Canada? Winnipeg?
We have a map.
Okay. Okay, you'll see that. So please give a warm applause to our friend Sasa.
So we're probably going to fight for the mic. Thank you, Daniel. That was a great introduction, and thanks for having us. So, yes, myself and this blind guy here is we're from Winnipeg. He's really not cool. He's trying to be cool, but he forgot his glasses.
I lost my glasses with much appreciated. So if you're next time you're in there, look for them.
Yeah. Okay. So we 546 876 is our company name. It's an incorporation number for a company, so not very creative at all. But to us represents the fact that we work in around one single table. There's 20 of us now. And we started in 2007, so 10 years ago, almost exactly to date. And we believe that, I guess architecture is not sort of a practice of a single hand, but that great ideas come from around the table. And therefore the number became so very appropriate to represent that, so people aren't working under us. There's sort of several things that I think we have, maybe not in common, but sort of the context that defines us, which we hear that it never rains in Peru, or in Lima, which I find just fascinating. Winnipeg is a very extreme place too, so it's in the center of the North American continent, but very far north when it comes to the climate. We're a prairie city, so that means we're completely flat. Turn a little. Okay, sorry. Our closest big city is actually Minneapolis in the States. It's 8 hours drive. We have absolutely nothing near us. The closest Canadian city is 14-hour drive away. And so I think one of the things that really defines us is this isolation. You have to invent things. You have to sort of create a culture to have it at all. And the other thing, of course, is that it gets really hot in the summer, but it also gets really, really cold in the winter. And so we have these extreme temperature swings, almost 80 degrees, and that makes building a tough business.
Yeah, one of the things we really sort of noticed here in Peru and in Lima is that we talked a bit about it earlier. Your walls basically are made out of two lines, the inside line of concrete and the outside line of concrete. Our walls start at about 12 lines by the time we put all the layers together that we need for rain and for cold and for warm and for vapor and for moisture this, moisture that, and protection this and protection that. So by the time we build a wall, it becomes this sandwich that is impossible actually to build. So our construction is very complicated and sometimes feels unnecessarily so, but that's what science tells us.
Anyway, we also suffer from ambivalence about architecture. So our city, when we first started 10 years ago, didn't care at all about design whatsoever. We have these red blocks here, all the surface parking lots that are in the city. Winnipeg is about 750,000 people, so a very small city compared to Lima, but we have the most surface parking lots per capita in the world, and so it's a terrible statistic to have. So you can imagine that our city needs, more than anything, needs density, needs vibrancy, needs more people. It's really sort of lacking in multi-family housing. Everybody lives in an individual house, which you sort of see. That's the texture of the city. So it's a very curious place. We're both actually originally from Europe, a very curious place for us to practice architecture in these conditions. And this is just a little thing that tells you, I guess, what we value and what we think goes into architecture that we try to practice. You can't borrow from sort of one set of values, but you have to deliver them all, from anything from design quality to social and civic responsibility to constructability and so forth. And we're trying to sort of push those into all of our work. When we first started, we learned very quickly that in our context, where people don't care about design, they don't care about that design value, that we have to work with numbers. So we have to deliver, and we work for private development, so we have to deliver the pro forma, the business case for architecture first. Then we could have a chance to talk about the design values and trying to infuse them in.
Okay.
And then I guess, of course, this is an aerial view of Winnipeg. You can see how flat it is. We have basically there's no Andes. We love the mountains, they're amazing. But yeah, this is completely the opposite. But that also creates the fact that there is no border. So sprawl is an enormous issue. We continue, not like 10 million person city issue, but we continue to try to figure out how do we convince people to sort of build in, because the most sustainable way to live is density, it's compact cities. And we have roads to no end, and everybody spends a lot of time in their car. We decided to stay in Winnipeg 10 years ago when we graduated, but all of our friends left to other places that seem to have more opportunity for architecture. We used to call Vancouver Winnipeg West, right on the coast. Winnipeg East was London, because they actually had more people that we had left in Winnipeg from our class. But that also is the opportunity. I think it's the idea that second cities, we call them, cities that are not the prime locales in their country or in the continent, are the meccas of architecture, are the new frontier, perhaps, or where you can carve out interesting proposals in architecture.
Keep in mind.
We also think that it's essential for us to practice not only just in building architecture, but try to create that culture. So we've been doing things for, Sasha calls them lose your shirt projects, which means that
Go bankrupt projects.
Go bankrupt. We basically do things that restaurant on ice. We're involved in envisioning some of that. So in Winnipeg has the longest skating trail in the world, 12 kilometers. In the winter our water freezes. And then there's a restaurant you can eat great food at. So great culture and food here, we understand. Things like design festivals or dinners for 1,200 people. Warming huts on ice. Reuthen Architectos actually was one of the invited guest builders here. So little huts on that skating trail in the winter. You guys should look into it too, participate, and maybe get your hut built.
No, we're just heading to Jerry this year in 2 days, going back tomorrow morning to do that. Friend Gary did one as well, which is that ice thing in Beyond the Way.
But the point is that, again, because we're isolated, because we don't have that sort of architectural culture, we have all other parts of culture, but architecture had really dropped off of that radar, that how can we reinvent that alongside with the projects? And then, of course, we do competitions. We try to sort of further ourselves, like everybody else in the world. Did the Helsinki Guggenheim Museum competition. We got, we have food dabbles in sort of having some success in international competitions and hoping to get there. We teach, of course, as well. And then, as a group, we try to challenge what we think we know as well.
Okay, so this is in essence the cross section of the people that have worked with us over the first 10 years. That's our third partner that's missing. Today we're sort of asked to do this lecture, what we feel, about an hour ago as we hopped into a cab. So we pieced a few things together. So it's the projects that are either just finished and have not been published, or we're just working on them. So there's very few projects that we're going to show you. This is a housing project that's been on the boards since 2010, so 8 years, and it's finally happening. And unfortunately, we have too many slides about it. It's started off with as a completely different project for medical residents and turned out into condos where it's at right now. It's really on the site, it's sort of surrounded by no landscape. I can maybe take control. I'm going to talk about it. It's surrounded by warehouses. The site doesn't have frontage, so it actually doesn't look over anything that could be commercially viable. It's bounded by a highway, a couple of warehouses, and back to some new condos that we've actually done.
I just need to add to this. So the developer came to us asking whether we can make housing viable on the site. And because it doesn't have any of that frontage, it's backing onto a freeway, the immediate thing for us was to lift it up on stilts. But of course, that is never the cheapest option, and we had to then overcome in those numbers that I mentioned earlier, in how can we build something and then justify the cost of lifting it up. And we were searching for the most efficient form. So this is really sort of math on how to get there.
All these architectural exercises proved to be done. We were fitting enough units, but basically went back and said, okay, what is let's divorce ourselves from any geometric preconceptions and so on, and found out that a circle is much more efficient than a square, about 30%. And so basically the building ended up being circular just because of that. And the exercise, as Johanna says, became just purely exercise in minimizing costs on every other level. So this is what we intended the building to look like. It's basically, on the left-hand side, you can see the typical floor plan with 20 units, all pie-shaped, all one-bedroom suites, two of those stacked on top of each other. And that's sort of what it looks like in section. It's almost complete. It's very Peruvian in its state of completion. We have not seen many completed buildings in Peru. We're pretty sure Machu Picchu was never completed either. And this building, our developer, who's a very good friend, never completes his projects. He's been working on a project next door for the last 7 or 8 years. It's still not done. And it's a 19 condos. It's that small. So this one's not done yet. But it's sort of the...
Just saying that, I mean, usually housing for us tends to be that how much perimeter can you get means how many windows you can get, that determines how many suites you can get. And in this case, we could get sort of quite a bit of window on the edge, sort of making these pie-shaped slices, and then all the utility is towards the back. So you see the bath up there, you see the bathroom towards the end of it, and then kitchen in the middle, and then your living and sleeping space towards the front.
Why not?
I guess the other cultural context that we should speak about just briefly is that, again, we see everything built here out of masonry, so either concrete or tile, or not tile, but brick. And this is sort of something that we dream of in Winnipeg. What happens in Winnipeg is that we have a whole bunch of immigrants from like Poland and the Ukraine, and most of our city, those are the guys who know how to swing a hammer and put together a 2x4 construction, so wood frame construction. And that's actually what is then the cheapest as well. And so a lot of this, anything that we can get out of concrete is amazing to us, and most of our buildings, housing, all the way up to 6 stories these days is built out of wood. And so this too was a prefab, it's actually a prefab wood building, so it was planes, walls and floors that were built in the shop, then craned into place. So the only thing that we got to do here, again, out of masonry, is the elevator core, then this radial, pattern of steel and concrete columns, and then wood was built on top of it.
See, here we get really excited by the concrete and detail everything, because we never get to do it.
So precast columns, and these are sort of from the build, us getting those from the shop. We were playing with the geometry of the round geometry that we've never really tested out before. How do you do it cheaply? Sana, for example, from Japan. Well, we can't afford curved glass, so what do? You sort of try to facet things, so mask that up. These prefab columns then marry the radial and the rectilinear geometry by having these sort of slices through them and get a bit of more slenderness out of them that way. And then the issue with having sort of flat windows and trying to make a round shape was masked by the number of fins that we then have on the facade to try to create a sort of interesting pattern and shadow and depth on the facade.
Take the eye away from the facade, right?
Yeah, take your eye away from it. But in essence, you know, so here's the steel and the concrete, and then the plywood basically applied on top of that, and then we would have a regular Winnipeg wood construction building that's 2 stories on top of that.
So this all took about 5 years to work through the right way to construct this and the way that it actually afford the project. So there it is, all in wood frame and the
building paper, and then clad into Corten steel that would sort of create the busty pattern over time. We also have sort of a poor man's version. Winnipeg, very tough to do hallways. This is the only building in Winnipeg that I know of that's multi-family housing building that doesn't have indoor corridors. But again, this is trying to test new territory, and so it gets, you know, the wind vortex in that middle part is pretty intense in the winter time. If you ever come and visit, let us know. We'll take you up. But summertime, very nice to sort of feel the temperature and to get the shadow nice and good. There you go. And now the sort of landscaping is filling in around it.
No.
So the second project we thought we'd share with you today is a brewery, craft brewery that we're building in one of our most popular sort of public entertainment areas in the city, in the center of the city, or public recreation area called the Forks.
So Winnipeg is a very young city. I've been learning that Lima has developed tremendously in the last 50 years. Winnipeg is a very slow growth city. We grow about, at good times we grow about 15,000 people a year. At bad times we lose people. So that's sort of the pattern of Winnipeg is nothing really happens ever. So this was our former rail yards. The buildings were rail car repair buildings, and now they converted to market as they are getting everywhere else. The client came to ask for a brewery, gave us a site and portion of an old building, of the old building itself, both of which were small to house a brewery. And so we were constrained from all ends, and then we stumbled upon, in research, the breweries in which you make beer have started vertically, have been gravity fed at the beginning, and that sort of craft of making beer has been lost in the recent memory. So we asked ourselves if it's possible to build a modern gravity-fed brewery. So that's basically what this is. The grains, which are easy to pump up, you pump them up to storage at the top, and then they'll trickle down through the system, through the mechanism that I need to get into, and get finished and fermented at the very bottom. And that's where you sort of get your glass and fill up the tap, if possible. And there's this very precarious relationship between the existing building, which we can't touch. So there's only, we call them nozzles, that punch through the windows or go through the existing window openings, and that's how the new building connects to the old. It sort of stands in contrast with it. So the 3 levels that are here is the ground floor level. We have a tasting room and a fermentation. On the second level is where what they call brew house, and the top level is the storage. That's how you see it actually injecting through the window into the old building. That's the actual brew house. There was a brew house and the tasting room.
Alright, so this project is just on the boards right now in the construction documents phase, and we look forward to sort of building it over the next year or so. So many of our projects are in housing, in private development. This is one project that, again, is sort of almost like a combination of public and private funds. We have a historic building in the city. Yeah.
Oh, I like this. Thanks. Okay.
Anyway, thanks for interrupting. We have been doing a lot of historic conversions, so we have one of the largest sort of, I guess, again, compared to other cities, wouldn't mean much, but in Canada, one of the largest historic warehouse building districts in the country, and probably North America too. So it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, actually, and we have a lot of these sort of turn of the 19th to 20th century buildings. one of which is the James Avenue pumping station. And it is a pumping station that was built to protect the city from fires in the turn of the century, so pump enough water for fire suppression.
It never actually worked. It was built just after the Chicago fire in order to protect our city, which was built the same way Chicago was. And it never needed to work. So it's beautiful inside, and it's really just a shed trying to put a roof over the pumps that you can see here in these pictures. The pumps were made by the same guys that made the Titanic engines, so that's sort of curiosity. Winnipeg is looking for anything to make it special or itself special. And as Johanna says, we have tons of these buildings that have been preserved, not because people like to preserve buildings, but because there's really no economic...
there's no development. So therefore we're lucky enough that we have all these historic buildings now because they never got torn down, because we have plenty of space to build new buildings in. What's sort of curious about this project is then the city now, over the last, I don't know, it's been 12 years maybe, been trying to resurrect the building somehow, make use of it, make it a public amenity. And there's been 12 different attempts to get it off the ground in terms of the financials that have not worked. Finally, you know, through various, I guess, configurations that we'll tell you about in a moment, we're able to get one of our developers to strike a deal with the city and actually take on the project and build it.
It didn't go anything like that.
No?
No, so we get a call from a friend who sort of knows the director of the agency that owns this building. He says, you know what, they're going to give it one more shot, and if they can't get it off the ground, the building, they're just going to demolish it back then and screw it and sell the site to somebody. So he said, okay, we've got to figure out a way to do this. This is not nuclear science, like we've got to be able to figure this out. So
you should make the story interesting now that you told me.
Right, so that's what happened. So three of us sat down with some guys in our office and said, okay, how can we make this project viable? Is there any way that we can do so? So we started running numbers. As Johanna says, we started off understanding the numbers first. So development pro forma numbers that make these projects financially viable are where all the projects start. Once they're financially viable, then you can do whatever pretty much you want with it, even in the development world. And so we looked at it. We discovered one thing that nobody seems to have figured out before is that if you look at back the building, you see these big beam lines, and there's a crane. I don't know if you can see that there's a crane, gantry crane that moves across those beams, and it was made actually to put these pumps into place and to be able to replace them. And then we discovered there's a tremendous capacity in those beams. So we discovered we can actually put a floor into the building with the existing foundation, which all of a sudden created financial opportunity. And we said, okay, so now we can preserve this gem, and we identified there's a potential to build a building both in front and behind the building. Everybody knew about the building in behind, but nobody knew about the site in front. So we said, if you can build a building in front, build a building in front, and build a building in behind, and do the things inside, it started to make economic sense. Then we sold that to the developer. Then it took him 2 years to negotiate with the city, and we're in the ground now building the building.
Everybody fell asleep.
I know.
Yeah. Okay, and this is actually one of the first wood frame 6-story buildings in Winnipeg. So still dealing with wood frame and understanding what the local economy is, where you get the most competition. And now we're building micro suites on this site. So this is again housing on both sides, sandwiched together with the commercial space that's in the existing old historic building. And then it's going to have various parts that are public. We're cutting in. We have better pictures of it. We're cutting in a sort of a plaza into the front of it and actually exposing some of the foundations so that you can get access to the ground floor, and then you can actually get to see the pumps and be within them. And then up higher in the building is that floor that Sasha was talking about with the crane, where we can have full 12,000 square foot office space above there. And again, the developer is getting a long-term tenant here, so that makes all the difference when it comes to the financial picture. And then we can play with architecture.
For me personally, what's very interesting about this project is the fact that it didn't exist until we figured out a way for it to exist, and then got the fee for us to finish the project. So we actually, as architects, we can become instigators of projects in your own city. You can just find a way to actually connect the right parties and, of course, get some benefit out of it yourself.
Then onto something completely different. We too do a lot of private housing projects or private house projects. This happens to be a cottage in our cottage country, which is a beautiful area in the Canadian Shield. Lots of lakes and evergreen trees and so forth. And we had been working with the same client building them a boathouse about, I don't know, 2 years into our practice, so about 8 years ago. And he always had sort of a master plan for his cottage site to build a guest cottage, which was driven by his wife, and then eventually to build the main cottage again, or replace the existing one there. And there was this curious request by the wife, or the woman in the couple, who really wanted something to do with Hansel and Gretel, you know, the Hans Christian Andersen story, the witch's hut. And we were really baffled by the commission because we didn't know really how to interpret that and what to do with it, and how do we speak that language, which wasn't really familiar to us, sort of cozy and I don't know what, you know the story, right? And so then I guess at some point from there we started to work with that formally and came up with an idea that we could do a sort of heavy timber frame. What do you call it? Chimneys almost.
You know that at the end of the story, I think maybe it's a different story altogether. This is a different story. When it rains, the witch disappears, right? And the only thing that remains, I know that's the Wizard of Oz, I think. So when it rains, the witch melts, and the only thing that remains is the hat, right? And so the hat falls down and it's held by its own structure. So the idea behind this entire thing, trying to draw a reference to witch's hut, was the idea of basically a cloak, if you wish, the witches were wearing, and these bones trying to support it, and the skeleton trying to support it.
I think you're reaching there.
That was my theory, at least.
What we sort of were really interested, though, too, is having done all of this housing that was very formal, had to do with the numbers, had to do with how many things can we fit in and make the case better. What we often tend to miss out on that kind of exercise of architecture is the sort of quality of light, is the sort of is how it feels in the space. And so we were excited about these kinds of commissions because we get to play with something different, which is how the light enters into the space. You know, where does it come from? All the basics that we get to work with. So it's a different sort of sensibility. And to me, it's sort of those apertures on the witch's hat that gives us some of that play.
So really, then the building is very much this cloak that hangs on the timber frame, which is an unusual way to build a timber house. And then the rooms are defined by these boxes that are inserted within the frame.
And of course, for us, it's always too how the building sits in the snowy landscape. How does it sort of set itself apart in that landscape? Because we have the extremes. We do have the very lush summertime too, but it's often, you know, how do you sort of draw the beauty out of the winter landscape? And this is sort of our maybe romantic idea of how that can occur.
So one of the things that really drives us as a practice, one of the things we haven't showed you, it's about 10 completed housing projects that our career has been resting on. That's what Johanna is referring to when she's talking about all this housing that we've done in the past. So that's been our bread and butter for quite a while. It's multifamily housing, which is fairly rare form for architects in our part of the country. Everybody lives in their own house. So this was a very interesting commission that came out and sort of really nicely dovetailed into our research in housing, which was to take two of the most prominent surface parking lots that you can see right there. There in front of what is now a Museum of Human Rights, designed by Anton Predok, right there in the front, and do a master plan for not only a master plan, but figure out how we could build a new housing project in Winnipeg for about 1,000 suites.
What it means to, in I think North America, it is very tough these days. Toronto, Vancouver, a lot of those places are suffering from the lack of real human scale. And I think the things that, you know, over 1,000 years we've discovered in Europe that have made sense for the human body to occupy space in the urban area is often much lower to the ground. And so part of our task was we were doing research and looking at neighborhoods in Berlin and discovered that you can actually get the same amount of density. And remember, density is our biggest issue. We need density in Winnipeg. So how do we get most of it, and how do we still create human scale? It's not with towers, because all the way up to, I guess, 12 stories, you can get the most amount in 6 stories, and that's still very comfortable for the human body. So those are some of those numbers. And so previous attempts at this site and how it should be designed was, everybody wanted a glossy big tower. And we took the same amount of area out of those 4 or 5 big towers and put it down to the 6-story maximum level, increased the perimeter around the buildings by having in smaller blocks, but also really spoke to the slow growth Winnipeg context, which is that we can't build mega projects, and if we do, they're going to be very homogeneous, they're going to feel sterile, they're not going to feel authentic to the city. But this way, we could actually invite up to 35 different developers to come and build in this area, and not just one sort of mega developer from Toronto or Vancouver, or God knows where in the US. And so 32 projects instead of 1, the maximum 6 stories, so we keep the scale down. We actually put buildings closer together, which creates that density. We have units anywhere from 400 to 1,500 square feet, if that makes sense. Or
40 to 60 years.
Yeah. We have what we call an offset grid, meaning that you can create microclimates now in these courtyards in between. We increase the amount of public space that's shared, which again is sadly lacking in our context. Almost every outdoor space is privately owned somehow. So how can we create a city where every citizen is welcome? And microclimates, by offsetting the buildings from one another, the wind doesn't howl through. You can actually reduce the amount of cold and wind in that space quite a bit, and then increase the amount of time that you can occupy outdoor space far into the almost the winter season.
Yeah, wind is one of those things that makes our winters unbearable. If it goes to -40, it's dry enough, you put a jacket and you're fine. If the wind can actually kill you in 3 minutes. Because we're open all the way to the North Pole, and it just sweeps down from the North Pole to Winnipeg.
And the idea would be that these things will get developed in that sort of cluster or a courtyard. So we're focusing on not on the buildings themselves, but the spaces in between the buildings. And that's been a really sort of a key concept to us. And now we're in the process where we have actually gotten 8 developers to come and build the first 10 buildings on the site, and they're putting a shovel in the ground next year. So, big master plan project, excited about its outcome.
But it's one of those things that did not stop at the master plan. We're now getting into negotiations, design, and the design of the public spaces with the developers and so on. So we did not, from the get-go, the client nor us, trusted a master plan definition of writing a big book that actually sits on the shelf and collects dust every year. It's a sort of a working relationship with all these developers, making it really messy and difficult and complicated, tough to coordinate, but certainly trying to get some grit out of it so it does not feel sterile at the end of it all.
Now we have a chance to work in Calgary. Calgary is, I mentioned, the next next city in Canada to Winnipeg, with 14-hour drive away. What we're asked to do there is a really interesting commission. It's called the Parkade of the Future. And what that means is that this is the last parkade that city is ever going to build. Because in 2014 was the first year when we actually drive less since the invention of car in North America. And so they believe that the use of cars is actually going down, and therefore they don't want to be the last fools who are building a parkade in their city, even though it's very car-centric as well. And what it also means is that we have to be able to convert this parkade into something else in the future. So certain rules apply. It should have flat floors so it can be converted. It should have higher ceilings so it doesn't feel like a parkade. And it should have more structural capacity so that you can add other uses.
Etc., etc. I don't know if it's interesting. No, it isn't. So we've gone through the process that was supposed to last literally 2 months. We are now closing on a year. And we're finally at a place where we think we have a concept to proceed with, because the client was thinking this is one of the simplest commissions they are going to give, and it has arrived to being one of the most complicated, not only from structure and things that we've discovered through that process, but also through this idea of conversion in the future and what could it be. So that's really all it is that we have to show you for now about the parkade. I think this is our second last project, and it's another house, and it's again a very similar story to what you shared earlier. Johanna gets this call from a small town, about 5 hours out of Winnipeg. Client says, I would like to buy a house and I'd like to hire you to do that. Johanna says, well, you know what, architects are very expensive, you likely don't want to spend that kind of money. Think about it twice and then call us back again. And then they tried to reach her by email, and the email somehow goes in junk mail, and they hop in a car in essence and drive to Winnipeg.
You know, Sasa exaggerates a lot.
Come to our office. Fortunately, our third partner and I were the ones to greet them. And they walked in with 2 pictures. One is Zumthor's, one of Zumthor's projects, and then the other one was this house from my father from China. Both spectacularly beautiful projects. And then we knew these guys were for real. So they're South African. She's a doctor and he's a fine woodworker, and they live in Regina, which is this town of I want to say 250,000 people in the middle of the prairies as well. And they really, all they wanted to do is stick it to Regina. They wanted to show Regina we can have good design in Regina. So that's all they wanted. So they bought this lot, which is about 40 feet wide, so about 13 meters wide and about 120 feet wide, which is about 40 meters deep, or sorry, deep. And they said, okay, what can we do here? So again, it was a very tall order given the precedent that they showed us and their taste. And the house itself is a fairly simple. We tried to stay away, and this is a longer conversation, tried to stay away of this Canadian architecture, which is generally box-on-box architecture, especially when it comes to houses. The Canadian architects are very crafty in creating very beautiful houses by stacking boxes on top of each other, and we're always trying to do something that's contrarian. So that's one of the things we try to stay away. But one of the things that sort of stuck with us talking to our clients was that she was an avid gardener. So she would pull her 40-hour shift and go home, sleep for 10 hours, and garden for 2 days. And but their lot was very small, and the house barely fit on it. So we tried to find out, and in Canada, the way you don't build to the property line, you have to stay away so the lot just gets smaller and smaller. So we ended up building this house that is perhaps not unusual for you here, but for Canada, very unusual. We ended up using the fence as the house walls, and therefore extending the perception of the yard all the way to the property lines on the side.
And I think what's even more curious that, typically in the north, you try to maximize the amount of light that you get in. And these guys were actually, being South African, they said to us that they're sick of light. They don't want any more light. They don't want any direct sunlight. And they especially don't want it in their private quarters. The view to the neighbors, too, was an issue. And so those became sort of the drivers of the quality of the house. And so it has this concrete base that's really strong, and as Sasha was saying, extends to the property line and extends the sense of the house from the inside out. And then the other requirement was that they wanted a granny suite, or they wanted a rental suite that now is in the basement and kind of is a walk-out basement, so we carved some of the site down as well.
Yeah, as you can see in the middle section there. So the house is just under construction, and they are finishing inside, but it really relies on its courtyard. And the internally oriented for the ground floor, and then the upper floor is I don't think we're going through these plans, and that's the courtyard going down to the basement or to the grand suite in the basement itself. But the upper box is where I think we've sort of gotten to a point where we invented something curious, which is the way that the light is let into the building, and the plan looks rather awkward and weird, but what it actually means is that the walls are treated almost like a soft sheets and then just pushed, creating these triangular windows. And one of the things that we were able to do in this house that we wouldn't be otherwise is we had this amazing craftsman on our crew, which is the owner of the house, who ended up building these 4.5 meter tall triangular windows that pivot, right, in our climate, which you can buy.
Well, again, I think this may seem very simple to you guys, because you can pour this thing out of concrete and have this soft form and then put a single piece of glass in place and it would be all done. The way that it needs to get constructed in Canada or in Regina too is out of wood frame and then gets clad in stucco on top of that. But again, this is particular sort of result of, particular result of the fact that they requested not to have direct sunlight. Then we had this craftsman as a client who would actually build these windows, and the sort of resulting quality of light is something that's quite unusual.
So the house was actually poured in Regina and was framed in Winnipeg. So we could actually see how it's framed, and these walls were shipped into Regina on a truck. And that's, who is this? Cool, I've never seen that. Why don't you speak about that?
Okay, just one quick example of the sort of public projects that we do, that we invent to try to entice Winnipeggers to take part and be interested in their city. 2 years ago, in 2015, we invented a project called Share Your Idea. And the thought was that we would ask Winnipeggers to present an urban design idea that could be boiled down to Twitter length, so that it could be 140 characters or less, and would cost around $30,000. We asked them to do so by paying us $25 for entry fee, and it became a competition among just regular folk in Winnipeg. And with those registration fees, we would then pull together enough money for that $30,000 so that we could actually implement or make happen the winning idea. And then the thought was that as they would come up with that idea, they would also put that idea, write it down on a chair that could get placed somewhere in participating locations around the city. So that now we would all of a sudden have public space, people would be sitting on, they would be seeing the ideas, they would perhaps then be enticed to write their own idea down and then debate these thoughts so that we could have more discussion about what urban space is all about and how it could be improved. We also then managed to get the mayor involved, as the guy in the suit here, who was sort of the ambassador of the competition, and at the end of it, we got about 750 ideas, or close to 1,000 ideas, that now, even with the winning idea being the only one that got built, now the mayor has a whole book of sort of urban design incubator ideas that he can implement later on.
And this is what we're going to finish with. This is the reason we got that Calgary Arcade project. It's, and really the reason we want to talk about it is we were hired to do a garden shed for a public garden. So our budget was very low for Canada. It was $70,000 for the garden shed, and which doesn't get you far. By the time you get foundations properly done in Canada, everything has to be piled, everything has to be excavated, so engravings and so on, doesn't get too far. So we asked ourselves, what is the only way, what is the way we can actually build this and then add value to that? So we started off, as many architects do these days, with shipping containers, but we're fascinated with the geometry of their skin, of their exterior, and tried to grow that. And this is really what the project came to be, and we did it for a client that then later hired us for the Brigade project.
As we often do in the office, we had a big fight about what's the right idea to do it. Sasha was very interested in creating a beautiful object in this particular case. I was very interested in having a civic presence on the site. And we had a 2-day argument where we were throwing pens at each other, we were so mad at each other.
No, I think the problem was different. The problem was you wanted to create a space in between buildings, but we had only one shed. So it was very hard to create this space in which people could move around.
You just made it sound better now. No, you're very much interested in the object. I remember that.
I thought the strength of the object could do it. Anyway.
And then our third partner got in, and after this 2 days of fighting, and actually said, I think you guys are doing both ideas. And so that became sort of the extension of it. We could see that we can afford 3 containers. We could afford to stretch them away from each other. We could afford to have then a space in between. And really the design exercise became about working with that budget. How much steel could span the furthest, and how thin or thick did it need to be to have the structural capacity to stretch across? And then, what should the depth of that be? And then that light quality that we would get as a result.
So we didn't have enough money for a structural engineer in our fees, so we had to experiment with it. We had a great contractor who wanted to experiment with it. So this is the build in Winnipeg. Calgary is 14 hours away, so we actually tested it, constructed it in Winnipeg, and then shipped it and reconstructed it in Winnipeg for the budget that it is. We did discover the cheapest material in the world, which is the expanded metal lath, which is at the last layer. And in Quartet, it's probably the cheapest metal in the world.
Anyway, that's the result.